Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Page Turners Plus. Today, we'll be discussing Soraya Palmer's absolutely brilliant debut novel, The Human Origins of Beatrice Porter and Other Essential Ghosts. Soraya Palmer is a writer of Jamaican and Trinidadian heritage. In this novel, she revolutionizes the traditional story of Anansi without disrupting its core principles. For example, Anansi is a woman. But like the Anansi of the tales, she has the gift of the gab and she shouldn't be trusted to convey the whole truth. Anansi introduces us to a Trinidadian Jamaican family living in Brooklyn, New York. When we meet them, the family is struggling financially, the parents' marriage is unraveling, and the household is violent. From this web of gloom, Soraya Palmer weaves a story which is sometimes funny, always audaciously inventive, compelling from start to finish, and surprisingly uplifting. Now, let's jump into this story from the very deepest end. And, panel, this is for you. What do you make of the author reimagining Anansi as a woman? And is Anansi Beatrice?
I don't have. What do I make of Anansi being a woman? I think it was a brilliant stroke of literary license, for one thing, because obviously the Anansi stories, the Anansi coming from West Africa, particularly Ghana. Uh, Anansi is a man and transported across the sea, uh, and still a man, who is in the middle of trying to survive and tricking people who are in power and others. And so I think for a 21st century twist, but also and even a Caribbean twist, I think it's appropriate that she would make a Nancy a woman, with the struggles, the particular and peculiar struggles of women, not only in the Caribbean past but also in the Caribbean present. Particularly as women struggle against patriarchy and other forms of oppression.
Eric has said it all. Really. I mean, I agree. I love that. And at first I was like, wait, why is she saying she? And then I was like, okay, I'm loving the fact that she made Anansi a woman. I think it was very appropriate, not only for the reasons that Eric gave, but also just in the context of this particular story. I think it really was perfect that Anansi was a woman. I love that she did that.
I liked it. I liked the the reimaging of Anansi, as Eric says. That we've always had Anansi firmly planted in our minds as this man who had all the tricks up his sleeve, and that it's not until you ask the question, Paul, and not today, but when you sort of floated the question, gave me pause for thought. Because reading the book, of referring to Anansi as she didn't particularly phase me in any way at all. It just seemed natural. It just seemed as all right, I can live with this, But I liked it. I liked what she did, and for the reasons that Eric gave as well, it seems very appropriate in the 21st century that Anansi indeed can and maybe should be a woman.
And she gives an explanation in the novel of why Anand, because I don't know if you remember, towards the beginning, they were both, Nigel and Beatrice, started off by referring to Anansi as a man. And then there was this violent scene between Beatrice and Nigel. And the children are very worried about Beatrice. And she tells them the story of how the stories became known as Anansi stories because previously they'd been known as tiger stories. And essentially, she suggested that Anansi, you women. I think the suggestion is that women are faced with all these forces that are stronger than they are physically, um, stronger than they are in terms of political power. So you have to, in order to claim your strength as a woman, you have to take the approach that Nancy took, which is, kind of circumvent and disrupt the system. And so it was extremely clever and audacious. And I love that about the novel, the audaciousness of this novel. I found particularly exciting. But did anyone other than me, because none of you seem to have addressed it, and did anyone other than me think Anansi may have been Beatrice?
Yeah, I did at times, and other times I thought it was Beatrice's grandmother. Um,
Mm. I more thought it was Ma than Beatrice. I don't know. For me, it was Beatrice. It never occurred to me that it was Beatrice. I was thinking more it was Ma. That was a
I,
Nancy.
That
I
was
think
my
your
But
logic.
inclination as well.
mm,
I know later on you're going to discuss Ma a little bit, but that was my inclination as well. Ma being this um, elderly person who had all the wisdom, all the knowledge, um, trained classically, but also um, held on to the folklore stuff. Um, I saw Anansi more being akin to Ma than to Beatrice.
And we have to remember that Anansi is a trickster. So just the fact that we're confused about who she is in keeping with her character.
right.
But Tony, you started talking about Ma. Um, Ma is a trained doctor in the Western sense of a doctor, and she's also a traditional healer. Did you have any thoughts about that? The fact that this is how Soraya Palmer chose to present Ma, or do you have anything about Ma in particular that interests you and you think is worth discussing?
Well, apart from mentioning Ma being a trained doctor in the Western sense, the way Ma was, to me, presented in the book was very much a sort of healer, a traditional healer, not a Western doctor healer. Um, and I think Soraya Palmer, gave much more emphasis to that than Ma's classical training. Um, I thought Ma, in a general sense, was a very liberal-minded person, which, for her age, if you think about what generation she would be, I thought she was a very liberal-minded person, somebody who also reminded me of the Rastafarian type existence, moving away from civilization, going off the grid, and being at peace. She lived to, if I remember right, she lived to an old age, very old age, I think, if I'm not wrong, which also told me that the author was trying to sort of project a message about lifestyle and that sort of thing. So I thought very interesting character. Very interesting character in the way that she was also the refuge for her daughter in the end. Um, and I thought she was very central to the book, Paula. As much as Beatrice was central, I thought Ma was a very central character to the book.
Ma was Beatrice's grandmother, though, not
Grandmother, yes.
yeah.
Correct.
Eric,
Yes.
Eric, did you want to come in?
Oh, definitely. I love Ma as a character. I couldn't help but think about my own mother, uh, because Ma, with her sharp wit and yeah, her sharp wittedness definitely reminds me of my own mother. Although my own mother's not that as old as Ma is when we pick her up in the story, but nevertheless, she reminds me of my own mother. And as Tony mentioned, I was struck by her liberalness, but I attributed that she was closer to she was close to the motherland. If since the book ends like at 2005, she died at the age of 106. So she was closer to the motherland, although she probably would have been what maybe first generation born outside of slavery, or the second generation born outside of slavery in Trinidad. But still, nevertheless, she was born in the 19th century, and so she was closer to the ancestors. And I think that's that bridge. She bridged that gap. Western trained as a doctor, but steeped steeped in the knowledge of the ancestors who brought the knowledge of herbs and healing uh, from Western Central Africa to the Caribbean and to the broader Americas. So I think she represents that. So I mean I love that character. Oh my goodness, I love that character so much. I thought she was going to live forever.
Um, yeah, actually wanted to pick up on the same thing, the same point that Tony made about her being, you know, more liberal than you would expect given her age, but like as Eric touched upon, I feel like she was in tune with, the Orishas and our ancestors' knowledge. And I think we well know that a lot of our conservatism in the Caribbean comes from the colonizers. It doesn't come from our ancestry. And so the fact that she was steeped in that ancestry made her, because a more liberal thinker, because she did not have the constraints of regarding sexuality and that sort of stuff that the colonials would have imposed on us. So I think that really explains why she was so liberal or progressive.
What was interesting, I found, with some of the bits with her traditional type healing, as Eric says, the ancestral connection and the medicine and so on. Although that was very present, Ma still never lost sight of her classical training. Though, there were bits when you saw her still sort of not rubbishing the traditional stuff, but also not dismissing the traditional, not the classical training that she had. So I found that very interesting. She was like pragmatic, you know. She had all this ancestral knowledge and ways, but she had the modern means as well, which she kind of maneuvered them both. That's what I found.
But Francine mentioned sexuality. No, the novel shows us a teenager, Sasha and Zora, grappling with their sexuality. Um, what do you think of this aspect of how the author approached the journey of the girls towards discovering their sexual identities? Did you what did you think about that?
I mean, that's in these days, writers are definitely more open with exploring these issues. Not that writers in the past did not do it, but it's done with a more sophistication now, and also it's also expected. Uh, and it was this was interesting. Sasha's transformation, we might say, or I would say, kind of pendulum swings going back and forth. Sasha Ashes, but to her mother and her sister, she was always Sasha. Um, so that was interesting, and her relationship with well, I can't remember the name uh, of the one person that she was enamored with, and I would think that Uh, Zora had the more, we would say, traditional type of dilemma. Teenager, um, having a crush on the star basketball player and that sort of thing. I like the way that Palmer did that. She juxtaposed those two sisters in that way, gave us both sides of these sexual awakenings.
What I found interesting um, was Zora's, because when we meet Zora, Zora is a preteen and she's having sadomasochistic
Mm,
sexual fantasies. And I was impressed that Soraya Palmer went there, but why shouldn't she go there? Because
mm,
it's not that it doesn't happen. And then Zora and Sasha are growing up in a household where their parents love each other, but it's an extremely violent relationship. So I suspect, I mean, I'm not, I haven't studied psychology. I suspect that a child who sees love expressed in the way it was expressed in her household might very well have sadomasochistic sexual fantasies.
I think, like Eric said, the contemporary nature of the novel, um, you know, contemporary authors tend to um, broach this topic, um, more head on. And certainly I found that to be the case with Soraya. It was a head on broaching of this topic of sexuality. Apart from the two sisters, though, I think that whole question of fluidity ran through the novel with some other characters, even Beatrice herself, from her early experience, and Nigel. They all seem to have had some sort of fluid uh, type of sexual existence. And I'm not really sure what the author was trying to do in terms of, and I don't want to try to second guess her, in terms of sending a message that maybe we are all some way in our existence fluid by nature. I have to tell you, I don't think I am, but um, but no, you guys laugh, but the modern author that grabs this topic and deals with it does really give you pause for thought. The sisters certainly, especially the older one. What was her name?
Sasha.
Sasha. Um, I got the impression that she was more one way than the other, right? And definitely came to that acceptance, the way she carried herself physically and all that sort of thing. The younger sisters, or to me, although there were, sort of indications, but I felt that she was more the straight one. Um, but yeah, to not beat about the bush, I like Eric. I liked the way that the Soraya dealt with that topic, and caused us to sort of think through it like we're doing now.
Francine, you wanted to come in here?
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I mean, I'm like agreement about the fact that modern authors. I think it's something that it's they deal with it head on. It's not something that surprises me when I read them in books anymore, especially when you're talking about the younger generation of authors. But I think, as Tony said, she wasn't just it wasn't just the sisters. She pointed out, she showed us the youth of both of Nigel and Beatrice, and I think she was trying to, in a way, normalize it, or at least tell us, these things have been going on for a very long time. This isn't something new, right? This has always existed, this spectrum of sexual fluidity. So, like, don't be surprised. Maybe it was hidden from you back then, but it has always been here. And just so that people are aware that this is not something that has just suddenly popped up in the 21st century. It's always been there.
But Paul, before you move on, I am listening to Francine, and I'm thinking of the various Caribbean countries and where we are in terms of this idea of normalizing, as Francine says, because I am not too sure that you take the Trinidad society, and I think they're ahead in that way. But when you go north, Jamaica, I think there's a long, 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 long way to go there. Long,
It's
long,
getting
long.
better though, Tony. It's
Yeah.
getting better. Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not
It
even
is
too sure
getting
about
better. It's
citizenship.
I agree that we're not there, but it's
Yeah.
getting a lot better. Certainly, people my daughter's age, people in their 30s, uh, they are not concerned about they don't have these anxieties about sexuality that our generation had. They don't think it's that big a deal.
Okay. I'm not even too sure about St. Vincent where we're at, if we're to judge that. But not to derail the discussion of the book, but that is what I think was very rich about the way she dealt with sexuality, because it does cause us to reflect on where our societies are at and how close we are to the concept of normalizing this thing, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that's what she. I think that's what she's doing, though, Tony. Yeah, she's doing that. Those conversations that I had with Sasha is in Trinidad near the end of the book, and she encounters this white girl down there, and the white girl assumes that it's hard for a queer person to exist in Trinidad, um, and also just there is is a historical progression, but it's not a it's not a through line in the story. But she yes, she has the past of Beatrice, but also the past of Nigel's brother, and we see how those episodes ended compared to Sasha's existence. So I think there the reader does see that, oh, there has been a progression, not a stagnation or a retrogression in terms of the existence of queer folk.
This would be a good time for us to take the break. We're going to hear from Soraya Palmer herself, reading an excerpt from her wonderful novel.
Hi, I'm Soraya Palmer. I'm the author of The Human Origins of Beatrice Porter and Other Essential Ghosts. I'm going to read the very beginning of my novel, the prologue, called What's My Name? A Prelude. By the time you finish reading this, I will be dead, and you, dear reader, will have forgotten all about me. You see, I am what they call your faithful narrator, found in places the West calls fairy tales, what men call gossip, what children call magic. Let me tell you a story. This one we call the first. It is a story that sounds like all the others, and yet it is also the one that has allowed for the existence of all that will come afterward. But we'll get to that. In this story, two women sit inside a bar. The first one says, "Let me tell you a story." The second one says, "So tell me already." "Okay, okay," she goes. "Once upon a time, there was a girl." She starts and looks into her drink. Her tongue starts to hang out like an udon noodle. "Well, go on," the friend says, mistaking her hanging tongue for excitement. Only the girl's tongue won't move. The girl's breath is fixed in midair. Her lips form the letter O. Her friend pricks the tongue with her fork to see what's the matter, and the tongue falls out and skitters like worms on the ground. The bartender scoops up all the pieces he can find, and they wriggle in his hands. He worries about the mess he's made. He asks the friend to fetch a jar and cap from the top shelf of the bar in order to contain the skittering tongue pieces. He looks down and notices no blood, only eraser dust. The bartender thinks this is strange, but he goes to the bar to fetch his needle and thread. He begins to sew the tongue back together for the girl. This is a very difficult job for the man, as the pieces of her tongue keep moving, like the tongue doesn't want to be caught. Mountains of eraser dust are flying from her mouth, getting all over the floor. Her breath stands before them. The bartender does a good job of mending, except that he sews her tongue onto a piece of paper and stuffs it into her mouth. The girl and her friend rejoice as the girl begins to speak again. But every time she tries to tell her story, the words come out backwards. The ending changes. Let me tell you a story. This one will give you hope. Once upon a time, there was a girl. And this girl grew to be a woman, and this woman had the ability to conjure stories from ghosts. Now, the conjure woman had 3 daughters who loved her stories so much that when she died, it was all that she left them. Little did they know that these stories had a life before them, that this book had a life before me. You see, the woman and her family existed in a place called Brooklyn, where the maples lined the pavement and the houses were made from limestone and brownstone that glitters like stars do under moonlight. It must have been divine providence that white folks refused to live on these streets, believing they were haunted, therefore leaving the most beautiful houses to be claimed by the descendants of slaves from all across the Atlantic. White folks were not entirely wrong about the haunting either. If you were to walk down these streets, you might hear the faint sound of steel drum and boombox, and chickadee and pigeon. Or you might hear the chattering of ghosts, the spirits of colonialists, Ashanti warriors, slaveholders, African griots, mythic creatures and stories long since forgotten. But while white folks may call this a haunting, we know them to be the ancestors. After all, they only want to be able to walk through their homes like they did before their deaths, to sit in the kitchen drinking Milo, bestowing wisdom onto their children who are at risk of forgetting all about them. Thank you.
We started off controversial. Let's continue controversial. This novel appears to be very intentional in not pathologizing people for loving people who hurt them. Um, it was one of the aspects of the novel I struggled with. I'd like to hear everybody else's um, your reactions to the fact that the novel does take this approach.
Struggle I did with that from the word go with the supermarket scene and what happened after. I just felt pain um, about that. And when I thought about it being very typical, um, I felt that even more painful. But yet, as you say, there was really no judgment by the author. The author did not judge on the basis of the health index of the relationship was not judged on the basis of the obvious abuse perpetuated by males. And that is a vexing phenomenon for me. So like you, Paula, struggle is the word I would use. I felt pain, like I said, seeing what was unfolding in the various relationships, and yet um, I wanted. I felt if I was writing the book, I'd be more judgmental. If I was the author, I'd be more castigating of the perpetuators, and you know, that's what I struggled with.
I mean, I saw that the author was intentionally um, not pathologizing Beatrice for staying with Nigel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Francine, you look like you want to say something about this.
Yeah, I also struggled with that that aspect of it, but I think I struggled more with the relationship that Beatrice had with the daughters because there were constant references to them being beaten, and yet they did not, like you said, the author did not cast any judgment upon the fact that these 2 daughters still really loved their mother so much. And I really struggled with that because, for me, the amount of abuse that was heaped upon the girls for very basic infractions. I mean, they're kids, they're growing up. I struggled with I did struggle with that. But like you said, I realized after that she was very intentional about it, and I'm wondering if it's not because that's just the reality. Like that is literally what happens in relationships, you know.
I remember from my childhood, I had friends who had parents whom I considered abusive, but my friends did not for 1 second doubt their parents' love for them. I had a conversation with one of my girlfriends. I think it was last year. It was around the middle of last year. One of my girlfriends from that household. And she acknowledges that her household was abusive, but and I think she does resent it. She has a brother who certainly resents it deeply, but she still adores her parents, and it's something I just never understood growing up seeing it. I just didn't understand that devotion she felt. But maybe some people have a greater capacity to love than I do. Who knows?
Yeah.
Paula, we are definitely in agreement on that point. That's something that
Oh,
it's a struggle. I don't understand it, and but like I said, it's reality. I mean, so many people not, and there are people who don't even resent it or think there was anything wrong about it. There are people who actually glorify it and think that if it wasn't for that, they would not be the people that they were today. And it's something that find very hard to understand, quite honestly.
And quite frankly, I think that attitude is harmful. The people who think that they became good people because they were abused, I think it's extremely harmful. I think those people came out well in spite of it, not because of it. Anyway, Eric, I see you trying to come in.
yeah. I think the attention that Palmer places on those relationships and the abuse that was meted out to those girls, I think is indicative of her training. She's a social worker, so she's seen it all, and she works in a very hard field in New York City, and so she's weaving, in my estimation, she's weaving her work, her training, what she's experienced, the cases she's worked on, with this literary jewel, which I think was brilliant, and it had depth, as we're alluding to. It had depth to it. It just wasn't gratuitous. There was depth, and and that's because when those of us who have experienced the type of abuse that those girls experience at the hands of their parents, it's we yeah we may laugh it off, but every stroke hurts. We carry those wounds. And if we don't deal with them in a constructive way, either confronting our parents or confiding in other people or gaining professional help, then yeah, it can have a real deleterious effect upon us throughout life. So yeah, I'm in agreement. People are saying that, well, it was good for me. No, 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 no type of abuse is good for you. And I would definitely draw the line between constructive discipline and abuse. I wouldn't say that I was abused as a child, but there were a lot of things that my parents did that I didn't like. you know and years down the line, he's my father, he realized that he was too hard on us, and he actually apologized. So uh and I'm not even going to say that this is like part of our existence as African diasporic people. You know, I'm not going to put that on. That no, no. So, but still, um, and then this was something too that I think with the same point about the broom, but also not only about the broom, but also going back to Beatrice's life in Trinidad. There were elements I thought I picked up on where the type of whoopings and abuse that parents gave out to their kids, the parents were linking this back to slavery days. And basically, they picked up the methods of the enslaver to discipline their children. And that's something that's hard to break. So that's that trauma that's been passed out.
And that's precisely what it is. It's the continuation of what obtained, in the sugar fields and the cotton fields and so on, and how the slaves were kept in check, and we have adopted that as the way we discipline and bring up straight laced children. And the point that Paula was making, where there are people in the society who think that were it not for that, they wouldn't be the person that they are today. And that really, it doesn't just pain me, it angers me, to be honest with you. Because you say in spite of, I don't even think they realize how broken they are. And they are broken people. Collectively as a society, that is perhaps a factor that makes us the most damaged, to be honest. We lack confidence, self-belief, self-worth. There's so many things that we almost hate ourselves, and feel as if we are short of. And to me, that's a factor that drives that. I mean, among other things, what we've been taught about ourselves, but that's a factor. You're beaten into submission, Eric. You're beaten into submission, and that I think when your parents or your guards do that to you, that's trauma. That's real trauma.
Yeah, and the novel, even though the novel doesn't pathologize the characters for loving the people who abuse them, the novel doesn't pretend that this is not generational trauma. The novel makes it very clear because it shows the tremendous abuse that Beatrice, I mean, almost unspeakable abuse that Beatrice suffered as a child. Um, it shows us Nigel being rejected by his father because his father thought he was effeminate, even though Nigel was not even vaguely effeminate. And also the irony between the father preferring the gay son, whom he didn't recognize as gay because he was traditionally masculine. Um, and I was just saying that the novel doesn't make excuses for it. It just doesn't judge people for loving people who abuses them. Um, and the novel, there's one point where she describes the scars on Beatrice's back as the kinds of scars you see on photographs of formerly enslaved people. So the novel was not pretending that this was not horrendous. But let's move on onto a happier note. Did this novel remind any of you of any novels we've read together?
Absolutely. The two that came immediately to mind for me were When We Were Birds, simply because of the way that she interwove the folklore in the story. That was, it was heavily dependent on folklore. And the other one that I thought of was The Island of Forgetting, because, the main protagonists were teenagers, even when we met, Nigel, even when we understood Nigel and Beatrice's stories, it's from when they were teenagers, and the fact that it was dealing with, coming of age and sexuality. Those were the two that really jumped into my mind immediately.
For me, it was the mermaid novel that we read a long time ago. I kept going back to that because of the connections, not just with the folklore of mermaid, Mama Water, in this case, Mama Dolo, but also the connection to indigenous folk and Columbus, that deep history. And When We Were Birds did cross my mind just because of the setting, at least part of the setting being in Trinidad.
When we were birds, yes, I can see that. There's a sort of sweetness about that novel, When We Were Birds, with the connection to our ancestral being. And for sure, Anansi and so on in this one um, brought up that connection. And now that you mention it, Eric, Mermaid of Black Conch, um, definitely, I can see the relationship. But there's a consistent theme I find, and that is the way the author tries to ground us to our ancestral being, and that has been a common theme throughout most of the novels that I think we've read. That whole connection to where our soul emanates from, and yeah, so Specifically, when we were birds, I agree with Francine, and now Eric mentions mermaid. But I think in general, Paula, I see common threads.
I agree with everything that you all have mentioned. This one sky day, though, I think this novel is as audacious as this one sky day. And the magic, of course, the magic realism of this one sky day. Um, I don't know why I just thought I kept thinking about this one sky day when I was reading it. Let's move on a little bit further. Is there any history, folklore, anything else that you encountered for the first time in this novel?
For me, it was the as Eric mentioned, the Amerindian. I don't think I had ever heard of what was her name, Anakuaya, before. So that I think that was the first time I'd heard of that. And I did briefly think of Mermaid of Black Conch because I at first I thought, oh, is this the same character? And then realized no, it was not. But I have to say though, saying that, I kind of was thinking this is like a kind of like a Pocahontas story, because the story between her and the British colonel or captain. Uh, but it was the first time I had heard of this story.
Not so much Pocahontas because she was a Anaquana was a warrior. She rejected the British, the Spanish. She fought them. So I don't know that it's Pocahontas. Pocahontas is celebrated by white Americans because
Yeah, no,
she embraced them.
I just thought it's just because of, she had a relationship with the 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 colonel
But
or
it
whoever
was
it was.
rape. It was
Yeah, but I
forced.
mean, it was rape for. I think it was rape for both of them. I think the way Pocahontas's story is presented to us as though she was willing, but I'm not really sure that how true that actually is.
But Pocahontas had no relationship with John Smith. That is all fantasy. She did marry another white man, but nothing. She had no relationship with John Smith. But anyway, um, uh, the Mama Glow. I don't know how I got to be this age without knowing that Mami Wata or River Muma, her is Mama Glow in Trinidad. I don't know, and that instead of a fishtail, she has the tail of a serpent. So she was a completely new folkloric character for me. Um, yeah, I don't know how I got this old without knowing that.
Likewise, I think that was my introduction to Mama Blue. I can't remember encountering that character anywhere, a folkloric character anywhere else. But apart from that, I think, and maybe I am just so um, you know blinkered, but because Anansi absorbed me um, in the book, so I may have missed. Sorry, Paula, but I may have missed some other characters that were folklore characters that were being mentioned in the book. But Mama Glow definitely was an introduction for me.
Yeah, same here with Mama Dolo, and I had to look her up, and then I saw how it was spelled differently. When I saw that some of the words spelled, I said, okay, Dolo got to be sort of Dolo, so Dolo and water French, so that. Um, but also, I kept going back to uh, the the water in West African societies prior to colonialism. uh, river river goddesses were protectors of women, and oh my goodness, there's this novel that's set in Sierra Leone that I can't remember the title of right now. uh, the writer, uh, she absorbs the readers in that. I think it's called Ancestral Stones or something like that. But I went back to that novel too because it was about generations of women who went to wash at a particular river, and that's where they received like their healing and that sort of thing. So I'm looking at, wow, I mean, these motifs, these beliefs, come directly from West and Central Africa, and we have just we've adjusted them just a little bit, but the core meaning stays the same. And what I also got about received this is that how central the protection and love of women is in our West African folklore and beliefs. So bring that forward, that we as societies, with even continents, the abuse and misuse and disrespect of women actually goes against our ancestral heritage.
And we can just close off by saying, if anybody, which characters interested you most?
Paula, before you close off, I wanted to bring in another theme or aspect of the novel that I found interesting in terms of the way we record um, history or experience. Because when you look at the two sisters, one kept a journal and kept, and so this is the one who writes, okay? The other one um, was more the storyteller, right? More with the oral tradition. And I'm just wondering if Soraya wasn't doing something there with that. Because Eric is a historian, yes, and Eric, you know that we have our oral traditions, but it's problematic in today's time because we want something to go to, um, and the written version. And I just wonder if Soraya wasn't doing something with that, with the juxtaposing the two sisters.
She juxtaposed the parents too, because Nigel was a writer and Beatrice was a storyteller. So you have a point. She might actually have been saying something about, the fact that a lot of our history is, these oral stories and that's storytelling, but we don't have anything to actually go to, like you said, Tony. A lot of it isn't written down. I don't know, maybe we need to start writing it down some more. I think they're both
And I
important, but you know,
and the novel does address that very directly, because Anansi tells us at the beginning of the novel that she wants us to save her, and how we should save her is by remembering her name. We've run out of time. The next time you see us, we'll be talking to Soraya Palmer. So some of these questions that we don't have answers to, hopefully we will get the answers when we have that conversation. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye bye.